Chapter 21. The Toy Tinker. We left the Bonn estate on the May of 1st, said Nicodemus. We knew a lot more than when we went in. We had been in there for 8 months. Then, said Justin, we found the toy tinker. They were back in Nicodemus' office. Mr. Aegis had sat with them. Not quite yet, said Mr. Aegis. No, said Nicodemus. That was in the late summer when we first got out. We began searching for a place in permanently for the least of places we could stay for as long as we wanted. We had a pretty clear idea of what we were looking for. We had plenty of time to talk about it. On the long winter evening in the library, between reading books, the reading we did, we knew very little about the words you see, and we were connoisseurs. We learned about astronomy and electricity, biology, and mathematics, and about music and art. I even read quite a few books of property. We got to like a pretty well, but what I liked best about was history. I read about the Egyptians and the Greeks and the Romans and the Dark Ages, when the old civilizations fell apart and the only people who could read were the monks. They lived apart in the monasteries. They led the simplest kinds of lives and studied and wrote. They grew their own food and built their own houses and furniture. They even made their own tools and their own paper. Reading about that, I began getting some ideas of where we might live. Most of the books were about people. We tried to find some books about rats, but there wasn't much. We found a few things. There were 2 sets of books that had settings on rats. From them, we learned that we were about the most hated animals on the earth, except maybe snakes and worms. We seemed strange to us, and especially when we learned that some of our close cousins, squirrels, for interest in rabbits, were well liked, but people think we spread diseases. I supposedly we do. Thought, though never interested me, and we never spread many diseases as people themselves do. Still, it seemed to us that the main reason we were hated most being that we always lived in ceilings front, and in less times rats live around the edges of human cities, and farms strode away from men's ships and again holes in their floors and stole their food. Sometimes we were accused of biting human children. I didn't believe that, nor did any of us or the other rats. It was some kind of book of rats read in the worst of cities, and that what of course can happen to people too. Had we then no use to all in the world, the encyclopedias had a sentence of price for us. A common rat is highly valued and an animal in medical reach due to his illness and biologic systems to men. We knew quite a bit about that already. And there was one book written by a famous scientist that was called Chapter About Rats Millions of Years Ago. He said rats seemed to be ahead of all the other animals, seemed to be making the civilization of their own. They were well organized and built quite complected villages in the fields. They are discussed today. They are the rats known as prairie dogs. But somehow it didn't work out. The scientists thought maybe it was because the rats live where too easy, while the other animals, especially the monkeys and living in the woods and getting and smarter. The prairie dogs grew soft and lazy and made no progress. The monkeys came out of their woods and walked on their hind legs and took over the prairies and almost everything else. It was then that rats were driven to become savages and thieves, living on the figures of the world run by men. Still, it was interesting to us that for a while, at least, the rats had been ahead of. We wondered if they had stayed ahead, if had gone on to develop a real stayed ahead civilization. What would it have been like? Would rats to have their own tails and learn to walk? Would they have made tools? Probably. Though we thought not so soon, and not so many. Rats have a natural set of tools, and monkeys lack sharp, pointy teeth and never stop growing. Consider what the beavers can build with no tools and their rapid teeth. Surely rats would have developed reading and writing judging by the one way we took it, but that about machines. What about cars and airplanes? Maybe not airplanes. After all, monkeys living in trees must have felt to need to fly, just like a bird around them. Rats may not have to inject in the same way. A rat civilization would probably never have built skyscrapers, since rats prefer to live underground. And I think of the endless subways they would have had. I thought and talked quite a bit about all the things, and realized that a rat civilization, if one never did grow up, would not necessarily turn out to be anything all like a human civilization. The fact was, after 8 months, the Boniface estate, none of us was sorry to move out of it. It had given us shelter and free food, and there was nothing in it that was disgusting for an animal who moved in a different way. We also moved about grounds, and that never felt quite natural to us. So when we left, we decided that our new home would be underground, preferably if we couldn't find it a cave, but there were. We talked hard maps unless there was a preference in the study. Finally, we erased the closet to find a cave. We would have to go near the mountains. There aren't many caves in flatlands, and for food it would have to be near town, better a farm. So we wanted to find a farm, preferably a big one, with a big barn and silo full of grain. Near the month, we studied the maps and more, and it was Jenner, I think, who spotted an area with a good place that on the map. A big part was covered with corner lines and show mountains across these, and written in the woods, Thorn Mountains National Forest. Beneath that was a smaller letter, Protective Wilderness Preserve. Burning in this mountain turned to a foot field. The map showed rolling country with quite a few roads, but hardly any towns. We were right, as of course. Now it took us 2 months to study traveling to get to the Thorn Mountain National Forest, but we found it there, and under the edge of it right now, and there are plenty of caves, most of them never visited by people because people aren't allowed to drive in the wilderness preserve. There aren't any roads in the forest, but only a jeep trails were arranged by an airplane or got permit to fly over it. We looked at a lot of caves, some big, some small, some dry, some mostly damp. Before we chose this cave and farm, however, we found a toy tinker behind a sad sort of things. We found an old man lying in the woods in the morning near one jeep. Trails not so far from here, and he was dead. We don't know what he died of. We guess it must have been a heart attack. He was dressed in black, an old suit, and his style neat, not ragged, but his hair was white and his face looked gentle. I wonder who he was and where he was going, Justin said. However, Justin said he wasn't supposed to be in here at all. We thought to bury him. I said, so he did not by digging a grave, but covering him with high mounds and leaves and stones and twigs and earth and gentle mounds. Justin's discovery was in the back of the brush. Look, I found a truck with a small round hood and a shiny. The body, which was square, was large. It had rubber and gold little windows and in letters in gold were signs. The toy tinker, toys repaired, hobby kits, model sets, electric toys, all work guaranteed. Obviously, the truck belonged to the old man, the peddler of toys. The red and gold wagon was his shop and his home, and he had driven into the woods in the camp, and for a night against the bushes and the big beech tree, we rounded it up with stones and clearing away from the bushes. The tree was narrow. Brooke found it in a peaceful spot. Man's death. One wheel of a truck sunk into the soft earth, and the truck was swivel lay near. It had been trying to dig it out. The work had been too hard for him, and he had started to go for help and Cosper. This must have been just by looking. Then somebody said, "Whose truck is it now? It belongs to here." However they are, said Jenner. He may not have had any. He seemed to have been alone anyway. So someone to someone else, how would they ever find it? What? True, I said. We wouldn't know who he was, and if he was anyone else. So I suppose if he went to the trunk, ours, why don't we see what's in it?